If you love pigeons, you've come to the right place. Welcome to the All About Pigeons podcast, the world's only podcast dedicated to every aspect of the pigeon hobby. I'm your host, Philip Fry, and every episode is listener requested, ad-free, and created for pigeon enthusiasts from around the world. Whether you're flying homers, showing pigeons, flying performance breeds, keeping pigeons as pets, or just getting started in the hobby, we're here to learn, share, and celebrate pigeons together, connecting pigeon fanciers across countries, cultures, and generations. This is the All About Pigeons podcast. Hello and welcome to the All About Pigeons podcast. Today we're going to be talking all about the breed German Modenas with Brad Stuckey, the NPA director. He's also the president of the Southern Pigeon Club and the president of the German Modena Association. So, Brad, thanks so much for coming on and talking about German Modenas today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, I'm guessing you've probably had quite a few different breeds coming through your loft. What was it that really made German Modenas kind of stand out for you and pull you in?
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting story, actually. So, I would say that historically, my passion was color pigeons. Things like starlings, archangels, ice pigeons, swallows, and so on. And I lived in Louisiana. I was trying to find some of these different color pigeon breeds, and I'd begun contacting and researching and trying to find some different people. And a guy gave me a number for an individual, and he said, "Hey, look, this guy knows genetics really well. He also knows a lot about the different breeds you're talking about. In fact, I think he's got some." And so I said, "Okay, well, let me get his name and number." And so the guy gave me his name and number, and his name was Mike Bordelon. And so I called him up, and we talked a little bit. And he said, "Well, why don't you just come down and see what I've got?" So showed up at his house, and when I walked around from the front into the backyard, he had a little weaning pen set up there. And he had probably 20 or so different young German Modenas in different colors. And I paused and I was like, "What are those?" And he said, "Those are German Modenas." And I said, "I've never seen those in real life. Those are amazing. They're like little chickens, they're long legs and their head and their bodies turned to, where they look like a little chicken." And he said, "Yeah, that's actually called a hen pigeon type." And I was just fascinated with them. And I would definitely say that was the moment that hooked me as kind of that spark. The thing that kind of backed that up was he ended up becoming really, I'll call him my mentor in the hobby. I had the interest for genetics. I had the thirst for, learning about more than just, having pigeons in the backyard. And he invited me to some pigeon shows, different things like that, kind of got me hooked. So I always jokingly say Mike Bordelon's the guy to blame for all of this. So, he wasn't the type to try to talk you into anything. And so we ended up kind of talking about some different breeds that he had, some starlings and archangels, and actually was able to take a few birds home that day, and I was really grateful. But just that interest for that breed kind of stuck with me. And so to this day, I do still have some. Yeah, so until all the way till now, I still have some swallows, and I have some South German moorheads. So I have a few color pigeon breeds still, and they are near and dear to me. But yeah, the friendship and mentorship that I got, I think it was that added, facet, right, of looking for the camaraderie in the hobby. And he was the guy that really kind of met that need, that interest. And so eventually, I asked him about German Modenas, could I get some? And so, yeah, it kind of started out like that. And he always enjoyed breeding the German Modenas for kind of genetic projects. So he would get a different breed, which is why he had those color pigeons. He'd get a different breed that had a unique color or trait, and then he would breed it into the German Modenas and try to recreate a nice German Modena type with that other color. And so we kind of developed a nice bond there where he would kind of start a project to put some new color or something different into the breed, because he just started out with blacks and Andalusians. That was the first four birds he had ever gotten, and he just started breeding all these other colors into them and uh, redeveloping German Modenas out of that. And so he'd get them pretty close, where they looked like a German Modena again. And he'd say, "Hey, are you interested in this project?" And then my goal was to take it from there and try to get it to show type, add that finishing touch on. So he
Yeah.
did the hard work. I got the easy part.
Well, that's a fun project. I mean, and so what would you call is it types? Because there's these different types, or there's the German Modena, and then there's even well, Colton Friedel was telling me about, like, the classic, like one of the first types of Modenas. And then you see these
Mm.
Modenas that, like, they're showing, like, in Germany compared to what we have here. Like, so are these types, or are they like subbreeds? I mean, how does that work compared to, when most people say Modena, they're thinking of, the really large bird, and the German Modenas look quite a bit different than that.
Exactly. Yeah, it's an interesting story. I think there are things that are probably lost in antiquity, but from the history that I have read, the best thing I can tell is that it appears as though the original Modena is what is known today as the Trigonino Modena, that originated in kind of northern Italy. There were two small cities in north central Italy there. Modena, obviously, is one of the cities, and the other one, maybe, I don't know, 10 miles away, is Reggio Emilia. And uh, as different varieties of pigeons made their way around and into Europe, um, apparently those guys fell in love with some different things that probably, colors or traits. And, they began breeding birds in somewhat isolation in those two cities. And they developed a small hen pigeon breed that's not much bigger than a roller, probably weighs about the same amount. The Trigonino, that is a little bit shorter in length, and a little bit shorter in height, but just a little bit more plump in the body. And again, it's more of a precursor to the hen pigeon look that we think of, as a lot of Modenas, Kings, things like that have. But they had kind of a horizontal tail carriage, and so that probably would have been pretty different back in those days. I know Aldrovandi wrote about them in the, I guess, 1500s.
Oh,
So,
wow.
and he called them a very old breed at the time. I know I've read hypotheses that the Trigonino may be over 1,000 years old. So I don't know if that's a little bit stretched, but they definitely are a significantly old breed in terms of European ideal. And uh, obviously, the different breeders of pigeons in Europe, even though there were different races of people breeding them, did find communication and interest in other breeds as they would find out about it. And so some Germans found out about what a lot of times Americans will just call trigs for short, but uh, they the German, I can't remember his name, but I believe that he corresponded with a gentleman in Italy named Bonizi. I think he's written some historical books. There's actually a really rare book on the Trigonino uh, that Bonizi wrote. And in the 1800s, the Germans got the breed, and they began setting about making their own version. So they stretched the legs out, stretched the neck out, made a breed that was a little bit taller, shortened the length of the body, tipped the tail up a little bit more. They just took all the things that the Italians already had and made a more showy version, I think is what they were going for. Well, not long after they had begun breeding trigs in Germany there, they, of course, are corresponding with the British, The British saw these bronzes, these different toy stencil traits, the Gazzi pattern, almond, which wouldn't have been super well known. I mean, they were developing, of course, and had the long-faced tumbler in England, but there weren't just a lot of breeds that had almond or any of the stiffer colors. And this little breed had really, really rich versions of any color it came in, and it also came in a lot of colors. And so the British became interested. Well, of course, they wanted to put their own, style on it as well. And they had recently been importing kings that Americans were developing. And so as the story goes, the British took kings and then birds that had come by way of Germany, from Italy, the Trigonino, and developed what is today the English Modena. And of course, quickly bred it to a much larger and rounder bird. And then, the Americans see the English Modena, which is going to be a lot like the King's, but now they're in all these rich colors. They have Gazzi markings, where the head, wings, and tail are colored. The rest of the body's white. I imagine that had to be very striking to them. And so they get Modenas from England. And of course, the Americans developed their own version as well, which is why, people in America typically will not say English Modena because, the breed really isn't like the English Modena anymore. All the way up through, I think, probably 40s and 50s even, maybe even into the 60s, the Modena was a fairly small bird. It was very rounded, but it appears as though it was pretty small, even in the Encyclopedia of Pigeon Breeds, where Levi had some really great color pictures. Right. In the last edition, those birds were photographed in around 60 or 61. Those birds appear to be quite small, nice round little birds, but not very large. And of course, as America developed, more of an extreme to the standard, right? Kept bringing them bigger and bigger. I think that's probably where, you can really see that divergence where the American type and the English type really separated. And so the English type today isn't as large as the American type. Usually their tail and tip of their flights is held just about at the same height as the top of their head. So they're kind of tilted forward, whereas obviously the American type, as we know it, is large and it's very proud. That chest is really poked out. The head is real upright and alert. And so, so now you've got an American type, you've got an English type, you've got the German type, you've got the old Italian type. And I guess somewhere in the last 20, 30 years, some of the old breeders in America were like, man, the breed's gotten so big. We remember as kids or youngsters, having these smaller birds. And so the classic Modena was born. For a long time, they called it the toy Modena because I think that term was in vogue in America. Slap toy on anything that's a smaller version of the regular, and that's a cool name. And so they started to actually just breed them back down. And so today, now we have the classic Modena. So it's kind of an interesting history, but I think any breeder would very much feel that their variety is very much a breed and it's distinct and different. There's a standard for each and every one of those breeds. And ironically, the word Trigoneri is, from what I understand, it's kind of an old dead term from Italian, but it loosely means men who fly birds. So the name Trigonino comes from Trigoneri, which was actually referring to the people who own the birds, not the birds themselves. The word Modena got added, from my understanding, by the Germans who were just trying to place a name. And so they just used the city that they got the birds from. to place a name on it.
Huh. And is it true that they were thief birds, that they would fly and trap birds down?
Exactly. Yeah. So they had wars where they would the guys would get up on their rooftops where they kept their birds. They would let them out. They trained them with flags, whistles, and hand gestures. So they had a very complicated system for training and flying the birds. And they would the goal was to get all of the birds up into a super flock flying around over the city. And then at a point, everybody tries to call their birds out. And exactly the goal is to thieve the other birds. And some of the writings I've read about the originals in Modena and Reggio Emilia was that they had a lot of fun then, that evening or the next day going to the little town center and trading and bartering back each other's birds.
That's
So
funny.
I'm sure they had a lot of fun with it.
So that's how they. So I thought it was more like how the horsemen's would do it with one or whatever at a time, but they're doing it like how they do in like New York City, where they'd actually fly like a big flock and try to.
Exactly.
Wow, that must have been.
Yeah,
I always like I can't imagine because that bird. I'm thinking of like these large, they've changed so much. I'm like I can't imagine, uh, those things flying around and trapping anything else,
right,
but. They've come a long ways. I mean, that's quite a story about how much they've changed. I mean, yeah, putting king into them and everything else.
right. Yeah,
Yeah,
there's a lot of interesting history, I think, according to every breed. Every breed has a wonderful history. It's great to get to do things like this, where we can actually take that down and have that for
yeah.
posterity.
So being a larger bird, um, and like the Modenas themselves, I understand like some people will foster, but the German Modenas aren't that, great size. When it comes
No,
to
they're not.
parenting and breeding and stuff, like how does that work? Are they able to raise up their own young, or are you still using fosters with that breed?
So yeah, German Modenas are actually really neat. They still do retain the peppy nature. Um, I like to think of them as lively, but they're very very animated as a breed. It's rare that you get a bird that is calm. They're typically very very active. Um, it does sometimes cause some problems because you've got these amorous cocks that just constantly are cooing. They're running around in the loft. You ever seen a pigeon when he's courting and he doesn't have anybody specifically to coo at, and he'll just kind of pick his wings up and just turn around? German Modenas do that constantly.
Okay.
They're like court jesters.
Yeah.
And so as a result, because they are very lively, it can mean sometimes you have a little bit of trouble in the loft, but outside of that, it's very, very rare that I hear of anyone ever having a baby scalped in the loft. We know that that can happen in any breed, if just the
Right. Yeah.
conditions are just wrong. But outside of, baby jumps a nest and goes in another nest, usually German Modenas are very good parents. Um, they do raise their own. They take a size 7 band, so they're not that big really, um, and they lay well. They lay a large egg. Good fertility. You don't have to trim them like a lot of breeds
Oh,
to
wow.
make sure that they can couple properly. Um, so they can pretty much go right in and get to it. They usually breed quickly, which is nice. The only thing that I've found to be true that most American breeders will tell you, and in my own experiences are similar, is German Modenas typically do not breed more than a couple few rounds in a cage. They'll get bored. They're just so active that if they don't have that feeling of being part of a community, they can get bored and occasionally, abandon eggs or maybe not lay or not stay on and feed young. So what I usually encourage folks who are getting started is I tell them, if at all possible, get them started in a loft if you can, and then um, if you do have some problems, you can put a pair in a cage if you need to, but just keep in mind that they may only raise a couple rounds before they start to get bored with being in that cage and need more freedom. So uh, what I did was I built my loft to where, I guess the simplest way to put it is I have the equivalent of nest fronts, but something like cages in each loft. What that does is it allows me to have a pair of birds that could be locked up if they're being problematic. But if, say, they settle down, they've got eggs or they've got babies, typically now they're busy. They don't have time to bother the other birds. And again, it's not because they're being overtly aggressive, like we think of with some breeds where we worry about them going in another nest and just trashing the eggs or something, scalping babies. With Germans, it's a matter of they want to be active. They want to be courting and chasing and cooing. So uh, it allows us to close up a pair if they're problematic. But if you say, for instance, on a Friday evening, you get home from work and you're going to have Saturday off, well, you can always go and actually lock up the other pairs that evening and then let that problematic pair out and give them some freedom, on Saturday. And then you can close them back up, and then let the rest of the pairs out the next night. So that system has worked really well.
Yeah, I
But
mean,
yeah,
good
overall,
loft
great
design is
breeders.
control. That you want to have control of whatever situation that you have. So you're saying you have like they're not necessarily nest fronts, you have like breeding kind of cages inside your loft. What's your loft setup like?
So my loft setup is each unit is approximately 6 feet by 6 feet. It's about
Okay.
8 feet tall. And then there's a window that opens up to a 6 foot by 10 foot fly pen. And it's got a gravel, floor. So, I can actually go outside and walk through the fly pens as well. And along the wall on the inside of the loft is where the breeding units are.
Okay.
And so each unit is approximately 2 foot cubed. So it's three levels of units and then three wide for a total of nine nest areas. And then because Germans are very lively, they're very energetic and peppy. I find that the breeding process can actually go pretty quick since pigeons will cycle about every 15 days. Now, it doesn't mean that like a chicken, they're going to lay an egg or two, but they do have the ability to have a natural cycle at about 15 days. And so, if you've ever had a pair that you put together and you wonder why, it seems like it takes them a little longer. They go in and they nest and they kind of sit there, but then it's a couple of weeks before they lay. It may be that you put that pair together right as that hen was passing a natural cycle. And so it's waiting until she comes back around again. And so with Germans, what I'll do is when the babies are about 10 days old, when it's starting to warm up like this time of year, I have a little shelf, like I'm sure you've seen in plenty of lofts. This is actually taken from racing homer lofts where I've seen a lot of pictures and videos or even gone to the guys' lofts. There's a little shelf up inside their breeding area. So I put the nest up there. They lay eggs, hatch the young. They get to 10 days old. You take that nest, babies and all, and you put them underneath in the floor of their area, and you set a new bowl up on that shelf. That allows the pair to relay, right? So you at about 10 days old or so, if you think about timing of everything, the birds are right at about a month since the hen cycled last, maybe just a little bit more. And so what
Yeah.
you're doing is you're giving her about a week, week and a half to realize, hey, we've got a new nest. The cock's going to start courting her to go up there, and then they can relay. And then that's how you can get a lot of rounds out of them pretty quick. So, yeah, they do really well. And typically at that point, then I'm just weaning the young whenever the next set of eggs is about to hatch. So yeah, they'll actually breed in pretty quick succession once they get going.
And so are they how do you when it comes to these, I mean obviously you were talking about some of the different colors and everything. These birds come with quite a variety and they have their own way of calling colors and patterns, correct? I mean just like the regular Modenas.
Yeah, yeah. So that can get kind of fun.
Kind
I
of fun.
actually had. Yeah, it is. I mean, that's what makes it interesting.
For
Just
sure.
side note, when you think about it, there's not just a ton of species of animals in the world that have been domesticated. When you think about how many species of animals there are out there, humans have really not domesticated a whole lot. Um, so, I mean, gosh, maybe a dozen animals that you could say are really obviously distinctly domesticated.
Yeah.
Um, there's just, the wild form looks nothing like what we have as breeds. And most of those different breeds that have come from a single species, most breeds typically have fewer than even 100 different breeds that exist. I mean, think
That's
about
right. Yeah.
cats or, uh, you know, when you get to horses, um, you think about maybe dogs or chickens, you're
Hmm.
starting to talk like a few hundred
Yeah.
different breeds. But when you start thinking about that in pigeons, I mean, there's well over 1,000 different breeds. And
Yeah.
I've read some of the guys who are very well studied that have talked about hypothesizing as many as 1,500 breeds. Because I mean, every time we turn around, we see some new breed in some
Right.
far-flung island in the Pacific or something. And
Yeah.
so, I think that's the beauty of it. When going back to the colors in German Modenas, that's kind of one of the real interesting calling cards for pigeons is that there's so many different breeds and then color varieties and markings and ornaments. You just don't get that kind of diversity in any other domesticated species of animals. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, I've actually sat down when we started the German Modena Association about 7 or 8 years ago. We had talked about we at some point, we're going to need to have like a color list. And so I sat down and started doing out all the basic colors and conferred with some others, and we talked and talked, and we finally stopped it at about 150 colors and said, you know what? I mean, the probabilities are just, they could just keep going for a while. So we're just going to stop right here. And so, yeah, there's a lot. But I think the main things that stand out in any of the Modena varieties that make them somewhat unique is, of course, Gazzi. Now we know there's other breeds like Strassers, Pruchner Conics, Maltese. I'm sorry, and Florentines. Um, you've got these other Gazzi marked breeds. You even have some Gazzi marked breeds in powders like Hannah Croppers and Bavarian powders and stuff. So Gazzi isn't that unique anymore. But when you couple that with the bronzes, the toy stencils, like a white bar or white check, white lace, things like that, or a bronze bar, bronze check, you start to get a lot of variety. And then when you add dilute, so let's say you take a blue bronze bar and you add dilute, well, now you've got a silver sulfur bar. And then if you put that on brown, they call the bronze coloring on brown, they call that russet. So now you can have a brown russet bar. And then if you dilute that, you can have a khaki ochre bar. And so you see where I'm going. And then if you start adding the other patterns, or and then all of those varieties, you can have in Gazzi or Schietti. You can see how pretty quickly you
Oh,
can get to
yeah.
150 colors without trying.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then of course almond is again not a unique color or mutation, but the Trigonini Modenas, which Trigonino is singular, Trigonini is plural, um,
Okay.
as it goes with Italian. So in the Trigonini Modena, um, the almonds are just out of this world, and they breed them in every imaginable package of mutations. And so that's something that, while the Germans are more interested in order and organization, they're very, very good at that. They have kind of, steered away from the same amount of variation, but uh, they do, encourage, great almonds. And so, uh, as a result, as I began to try to figure out how to fine tune what colors I would work on because there are so many, I decided that, I definitely would want to work with Gazzi. Um, so I have three main families that I breed. Uh, One is the black Gazzi family, just because it's just a really standout thing, the black and the white. It really catches your eye. And then the other family is almond, which I have a lot of varieties I'll tell you about in a minute if you got time. And then the bronze Gazzi family. Those are my three main families, and it's because historically those are some of the real standout, notable things that are kind of special to Modena looks. Different colors and packages. But yeah, there's
Sure.
just an endless variety of colors that are available.
Yeah, and once you play with the colors and the patterns, I mean, if people are interested in that aspect of it, these birds definitely have a lot to offer there.
Exactly. Another thing that I like to mention to people just with the German Modena Association in America is that because the club is young, um, and historically, there really wasn't a vacuum or interest for another Modena variety, right? Because you already had the American Modena that was and is so popular, one of the most popular breeds of show pigeons in America. So you kind of didn't really need a smaller version, right? And
Yeah.
so there's always been a small dedicated following of guys, but they were always spread out all over the country. And so it's really difficult to get a club off the ground. And thankfully, we were able to get something going a while back. And I always tell folks when they come up and they say, "Hey, I'm interested in getting some German Modenas at a show or something." I'll say, "Well, the great thing is you're on the ground floor, so you can go any direction you want. There's no answer is no. Every
Right.
answer is yes. Because if you want to dream it up, I promise you there's a variety for that.
Yeah.
So we can hook you up. And you can start breeding towards that direction. So even
Yeah.
just this year, we had a guy who got into the breed, and he loves red. He loves marked breeds, and so we got him started with some red Gazzis. And so he's kind of one of the first guys that is dedicating a loft to just breeding red Gazzi German Modenas. And I'm sure he'll do great. But yeah, it's kind of an open book, right? You can kind of make it yourself and get going with some basic stock and then develop that into something. So
Yeah. So can you give us a points breakdown based off of like what the standard is for this breed?
sure. So there's not actually a point standard in German Modenas, but it is a form pigeon. So form is definitely going to matter more than the color, but color does have a high expectation. Um, and so really the main things, of course, like most any form breed, uh, breed type and balance and body form is always, the first things you're going to look at. Kind of an interesting thing is that in German Modenas, the standard calls the head and the neck to be about a third of the height of the bird. The body should be a third of the height, and then the legs and feet should be a third. The length of the bird should be about two-thirds of the height. So it should be much taller than it is long. Um, so that is kind of the quintessential thing you're looking at and looking for is a bird that has that balance. Are the legs a little too short in comparison to the body or head and neck length? Is the length of the bird too long compared to the height of the bird? So it does mean that we'll see some variation in size. And as a result, we do actually, the club offers size 8 bands because there are breeders who have a little bit larger stock. But as long as they have those dimensional proportions balanced out, it's okay. So we do see a little bit of variation. It's not a lot, but you do see some. And like many breeds, a young hen's typically a good bit smaller than an old cock. So you
Right.
see some of that. But then as you would move through kind of the order of importance in Germans, the size and overall preparation, I'm actually reading this out of the standard, just so you know. um,
Perfect.
Posture, neck position and shape, then the head, the eye color, eye sear, and then color and markings. We've actually talked about that because this standard was translated by a German individual. And there were a few little things that just accidentally got missed because the German standard is very in depth. Uh, in Germany, German Modenas are the most popular breed. Um, and we know that the Germans are really big into pigeons.
Right.
So, I want to say that hopefully Bob won't mind me saying this, but I think Bob Nolan had told me that when he had gone to the Nuremberg show, where they had like 100,000 pigeons that one year in the early 2000s, the biggest pigeon show ever held. He said that they were walking along and he turned to go down this corridor to another annex because he knew more pigeons are down there. The entourage, as they're walking down, the guy who's German that's kind of helping them find their way says, "Do you like German Modenas?" And he says, "Well, no, not particularly. Bob breeds English trumpeters. So, the two breeds are pretty different, right?" And he says, "Well, if you don't like German Modenas, you don't want to go down there." And he said, "How come?" He said, "That building down there, there's nothing but German Modenas in there." He said, "Really?" He said, "How many birds are in there?" He said, "I don't know, 7,000 or 8,000.
Oh, wow.
So there's a lot of them. And so they've got a lot of books about German Modenas over there. Even though the breed is kind of new and not well known in America, it's actually extremely popular in Germany. And so their standard had to be really condensed when it got translated into English. And one of the things that just was missed by accident was all of the brown variants in the color chart. They didn't make it in. They just missed translating all those colors from German to English. So I think that when we talk about color, our standard in order of importance actually has color and markings at the very end. But if you look at birds, especially in Germany, they have a very, very high expectation of color. So we have talked about that at some point we'll probably need to do a revision to the standard in America and kind of get a better balance with what the Germans intended. And, I think at some point in time, like most things, the Americans probably kind of go their own direction to some level because, breeds are always developing over time. So,
Right.
Yeah, definitely a form pigeon first, but a form pigeon that has a lot of color variety and definitely has high expectations for the color too.
Yeah. So you mentioned there's a lot of resources and books, you said specifically in Germany. I'm guessing those books are in German. Are there any
Yes.
English books that you would say are kind of like the Bible for this breed or good resources for people who are interested in learning more about this breed?
Unfortunately, no, there's not any books in English on the breed that I know of. One good thing is that for anyone who's interested in the breed, the books that are in German with Google Translate being of the quality that it is, nowadays, you can open that app on your phone, hover over a page and
Yeah.
it'll translate, gosh, probably 95% accurate, all those words. And then you can screenshot it. And then now you can read all of that at your leisure. The parts that can be tricky, as we all know, is that we use particular words when we're talking about birds, right? We have kind of colloquial terms that don't always express the exact meaning in our language, but we know that. And, we say pigeon lingo in English, right? And in German, they say Deutschsprachen or pigeon talk. So some of the pigeon talk or pigeon lingo doesn't always translate properly, but you can still get the gist of it. So, yeah, there's
Any advice or tips that you've learned along the way, specifically with this breed, that you like to pass on to people that are maybe working with it currently or just getting started with them?
probably the number one thing I would say is just, kind of have an open mind. There's a lot of varieties. The breed is young enough in America in its own way because its popularity is growing to just kind of have an open mind. A lot of breeders will report that they'll get a pair and they'll throw different colors they weren't expecting. And the reason is because as the breed is growing in popularity, some of these folks are picking up a pair of this and a pair of that. They got them in a loft and they're getting these different colors. Occasionally will mix up, or things that they carry will pop out. That is a popular trait in the Trigonino. That's a really special bird to have something that carries other colors. But, a lot of times when you're trying to breed blacks, you don't want to produce reds necessarily. But it's very common for black German Modenas to carry recessive red and have that pop out. Or, you'll have, blue bars or blue checks that carry dilute. And so you're getting silver bars and silver checks, or things like that, right? Gazzi is a recessive, which means that any bird that is not Gazzi, which Gazzi, by the way, is also an old Italian word that's kind of a dead language word, but it basically means with white. And then Schietti is also Italian, and it means all over. So that's where the two terms, Schietti and Gazzi, come from, referring to whether they have white on them or not. But yeah, just kind of have an open mind, have some patience. You're going to have some different things pop out that you were not expecting. Lean into it, enjoy it, have some fun with it.
Yeah. It's great. So I was at the Grand National, I guess it was this year.
Yeah.
And we always have a table set up for, anybody who wants to make a request on an episode or anything like that. We do that. Anybody wants to make a request, email us, whatever. And we had a sign up sheet, and a listener
Sure.
came up and was like, how come you've never had Brad Stuckey on? You can talk to Brad about pigeons. I get him on the phone and we'll talk pigeons for hours. I'm like, yeah. And I mean, anybody who knows, yeah, Brad's done a ton for the pigeon hobby. I mean, you've started clubs, you've been so involved, and everything you've done has been great. I mean, yeah, this has been great. I'm really glad that we've been able to have you on, and thanks for everything you've been doing for the hobby. If anybody who is interested in joining up with the national club, how can they, find out more information? How can they join up with the Modena Association? I'm sorry, the German Modena Association.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I appreciate the sentiment, and I've really enjoyed this. I appreciate you inviting me. But yeah, there's a couple different ways. Of course, you can get on Facebook if you're on Facebook, and search, German Modenas USA. There's a couple different groups on Facebook. They're very kind of open, so they're not real official like Facebook pages. They're groups, so it really allows a lot of communication. There's actually a lot of German guys that are on there as well, and so you can get some banter back and forth. So that's a great way to find out more about the breed. The NPA Quarterly and the Purebred Pigeon. We've got ads that we run in there, so that you can find information to contact us if you want to join the club, order bands, find birds, breeders. And yeah, if you're a club member, kind of like pretty standard for right now, dues are $20 a year. Bands are standard price. And we're actually working on a breeder's matrix, so that as people, call our secretary or any of the officers and say, hey, I'm looking for a certain color, we can try to start building a breeder's matrix to help get people connected. So yeah, we have a meet at most of the big shows. I say that we're working on that, right? So Louisville, we typically have a nice meet there. The guys out in California, which is really kind of where things began for German Modenas in America, they put on a show out there at the Great Western. Great guys. Des Moines will have birds. Of course, the Grand National, we try to show up in force. So yeah, come to a show and come see us. Really the one show that looks like this year is going to kind of be a big one is actually down in Alabama. It looks like a lot of folks are going to come there for a big German Modena meet. So that should be fun.
Oh, cool. Nice.
So yeah, a lot of people are getting into the breed because they find that they don't have huge space requirements. They're really animated. So folks who like to just sit and watch get a lot of enjoyment out of them because they're busy. They are always busy. So yeah, A lot of fun.
Excellent. Well, there you go. If you're interested in the breed, there's some ways to find out more about it. Join up with the club. Like I said, being a newer club, there are a lot of opportunities in getting on the ground floor or something like that. So, Brad, yeah, thanks
Exactly.
so much for coming on. This has been a real pleasure speaking with you today.
Yes, sir. You too. I really appreciate it.
And that's another episode of the All About Pigeons podcast. Thanks for joining us today and for being a part of this incredible pigeon community. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a fellow pigeon fancier. Leave a comment, follow wherever you're listening. Every share helps introduce more people to the hobby that we all love. You can find our one-of-a-kind merchandise, support our nonprofit mission with a donation, and explore all the different resources we have available for you at pigeonpod.com. That's pigeonpod.com. Do you have a topic that you'd like us to cover? Do you have a guest that you want to have on the show? Maybe you yourself would like to come on and just talk pigeons with us. Go ahead and send us an email at staff@pigeonpod.com. Remember, every episode of the All About Pigeons podcast is listener requested and completely ad-free thanks to the support of this community. Thanks for listening. I'm your host, Philip Fry, and remember, together, the hobby thrives, support each other, and enjoy your pigeons.